I didn't even believe it at first. I drove out to check my quiet, empty land, and instead found 35 brand new HOA houses standing on it like they had grown overnight, workers everywhere, families touring homes, construction trucks blocking my driveway. When I confronted the HOA president, she actually laughed in my face and said, "You waited too long. It's ours now." She had no idea who I was. She had no idea what I controlled. And she definitely had no idea that the dam sitting above all 35 of her stolen houses belonged to me, too. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And hit subscribe for more stories where people who take what isn't theirs lose everything in one single moment. I always loved driving out to my land on the weekends. It was quiet, peaceful, untouched, just rolling fields, a few oak trees, and the long stretch of river curving behind the property. It was the kind of land that made you breathe slower, think clearer, and remember what silence actually felt like. I planned to retire there someday, build a small cabin, maybe plant rows of fruit trees. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just mine. But on that morning, everything changed. The moment my truck climbed the hill overlooking the valley, my foot slammed the brakes so hard the tires skidded on gravel. My heart jumped into my throat because below me, where there should have been open grass and wildflowers, there stood something impossible. Houses, not one, not two, but 35 brand new HOA homes, lined up in perfect rows, like someone had printed a copy and paste template across my land. Fresh paint glistened in the sunlight. Driveways had been poured, sod lawns had been installed, families walked around casually, pointing at windows and porches. Construction workers carried lumber across my property as if it belonged to them. And the worst part? I had never signed a thing, never sold an inch of it, never agreed to anything. My land had been stolen right out from under me. For a moment I couldn't move. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest tightened. Anger, confusion, disbelief, they crashed into me all at once. 35 houses don't just appear overnight. Someone had planned this. Someone had approved this. Someone had built a whole neighborhood on land that legally belonged to me. I drove down the hill, each bump in the dirt road making my heart race faster. As I got closer, I saw signs posted everywhere. Future home of Willow Creek HOA expansion, private property, HOA, authorization only. I laughed out loud, a bitter, humorless laugh. Private property, authorization only, on my land? Construction workers barely glanced at me as I pulled up. They were too busy measuring beams and checking blueprints. One even waved at me like I was a visitor. "Hey man," he called out, "watch your step. Fresh concrete over there, my step, my step." I marched straight toward the woman standing at the center of the chaos, the one wearing a blazer, sunglasses, and an expression of pure arrogance. She held a clipboard under her arm and talked loudly to a group of workers, giving orders like she owned the place. The HOA president, Karen, she turned as I approached, and instead of looking shocked or confused, she simply smiled, a slow, smug smile that made the anger rise in my throat. "Oh," she said casually, "you must be the previous owner." "Current owner," I corrected sharply. "This is my land." "What is all of this?" She sighed dramatically, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. "You didn't develop it. You didn't maintain it. You weren't using it for anything. The community made a decision to expand. And since you didn't respond to our notices—" "Notices?" I barked. "You mean the ones you mailed to an address I moved from 3 years ago, without filing through the county? Those notices?" She shrugged. "Whatever the case, it's ours now. You waited too long." I stared at her, stunned. The audacity, the entitlement, the sheer criminal arrogance. She gestured around proudly. "Beautiful, isn't it? 35 homes, all pre-sold. And we're adding a clubhouse and pool next month. Sorry, but you really should have kept up with the paperwork." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You built all of this on land you don't own." She crossed her arms. "Disputes happen, but good luck fighting us. The HOA has lawyers, funding, and community support. You have, well, this old pickup truck." The workers laughed. Even a couple of homebuyers smirked. And in that moment, while looking at people walking casually over the land my father left me, land I grew up on, land I planned my future on, something cold settled in my chest. Karen thought she won. She thought money and paperwork scams and intimidation were enough to erase the truth. But Karen didn't know something very important. Behind this land, hidden by a tree line, sat a massive concrete structure, a dam built in 1964, A dam maintained by one person, a dam controlled by one key, my key. The HOA had built every house in a flood zone they didn't even know existed. Because they never asked, never researched, never applied legally. They just built and bragged and stole. And now they stood on land supported by a reservoir so full that water shimmered like a silver blanket behind its walls. I looked at Karen. I looked at the houses. I looked at the dam valve in the distance. She smirked again. You can complain if you want, but legally it's too late. This whole development is HOA property. I smiled back, slow, calm, steady. Is that so? She nodded proudly. It is. Before I turned to walk away, I said quietly, you have no idea what kind of land you've built on. But you're about to learn. I got back in my truck and drove toward the dam. The sun painted the valley gold. The houses stood proudly like a stolen kingdom. Families walked on porches that were legally mine, but not for long. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And hit subscribe for more stories where people who take what isn't theirs lose everything in one moment. When I returned to the construction site the next morning, the place was even busier than before. Trucks rolled across the dirt, kicking up clouds of dust that floated through the warm air like smoke. Workers hammered, drilled, shouted instructions, and moved around with the confidence of people who believed they were exactly where they were supposed to be. But they weren't. Every inch of ground beneath their boots still legally belonged to me. I walked toward the half-finished front office they were building, determined to speak to someone higher up than yesterday's arrogant HOA president. Maybe, just maybe, someone in this organization had a brain cell left. Maybe someone would understand what private property meant. As I approached the front, a worker with a hard hat and paint splatters on his jeans stepped in front of me, raising a hand like a traffic cop. Sir, you can't be here. This is restricted construction property. I stared at him for a moment, trying not to laugh at the irony. This is my land, I said calmly. I can be here anytime I want. He scoffed. Actually scoffed. Yeah, everyone says that. Look, the HOA already handled all that. It's theirs now. Talk to the office. He jerked his thumb toward the portable trailer that served as the temporary HOA headquarters. Then he walked away, muttering under his breath about nosy landowners who show up. Too late, too late. That phrase kept hitting like a hammer. I walked up to the trailer and knocked twice. A voice inside answered, "Come in if you must." I stepped in, and there she was again, Karen. She sat behind a folding table covered in blueprints, papers, pens, coffee cups, and a stack of flyers, advertising new HOA luxury community homes, starting at $450,000. She didn't even look surprised to see me. In fact, she didn't look annoyed. She looked amused. Well, she said, crossing her arms and leaning back in her plastic chair. If it isn't our former landowner. Here to complain again? I clenched my teeth but kept my voice steady. Show me the permits for this construction. All of them. Karen tilted her head and smiled sweetly. Of course, I have nothing to hide. She opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table toward me with 2 fingers. I opened it. The first page looked official. County letterhead, a stamp, some signatures, but something felt off. I flipped to the second page, the same date, the same layout, the same signature. Except this time it was slightly slanted. I checked the third page, another permit. Different stamp, same pen stroke, same signature, different angle. They weren't just fake, they were sloppy fakes. These aren't real, I said, tossing the folder back across the table. Oh, please, Karen laughed, waving her hand dismissively. Do you think the families buying these homes will care? Do you think anyone will believe you over an established HOA? I leaned forward. The county will believe me, the law will believe me. And when they ask for actual deeds and permits, she cut me off with a sharp, condescending smile. They'll find them right here. She tapped the fake folder. Paperwork is paperwork. No one actually reads it closely. My jaw tightened. This land belongs to me. She sighed dramatical. Yes. You told me yesterday. But we sent notices, we held meetings, we gave you your chance to respond. You mailed them to my old address, I snapped. You knew it. You never filed with the correct county database. That wasn't an accident. Her smile widened like she enjoyed my frustration. You can argue whatever you want, but the homes are built. The families are coming. And unless you want to start a war with an entire community, I suggest letting this go. Letting it go? I repeated slowly. You stole 35 acres. She shrugged. Unused acres. Unused? Unused? Something burned inside my chest, not hot and furious, but cold and sharp. Get off my land, I said quietly. Karen laughed openly this time, head thrown back like I told the funniest joke she'd heard all week. Oh, sweetheart, she chuckled. We'll be gone when we're done. Right now we're building. And unless you want to be arrested for disrupting construction, I suggest you leave before we call security. Security, on my land. I took a long breath, forcing myself not to explode. Years of discipline kept my voice even when I wanted to yell. Karen, do you even understand what you've done? These houses are sitting directly in the runoff zone. If the dam releases, this entire area will flood. She blinked slowly, as if processing the word dam for the first time. What dam? She asked, genuinely clueless. The dam behind the ridge, I said. The one that was built for watershed control. The one that feeds this entire valley. She laughed again, waving her hand. Oh, that old concrete wall? Honey, it hasn't flowed in decades. I smiled. If she only knew. The dam was more active now than ever. The recent rains had filled it nearly to capacity. I had been monitoring it weekly. The pressure gauge read dangerously high. One controlled release would send water pouring through the valley, washing over the entire future HOA community. We'll be fine, she added confidently. Besides, we already submitted environmental reports. Everything is approved. Let me guess, I said. You forged those too? Her eyes flicked away for half a second, just long enough to confirm the truth. Finally, she stood, picking up her clipboard. This conversation is over. The houses stay, the HOA stays. And you, well, you can stay mad. It won't change anything. I walked out of the trailer, my fists clenched, my anger simmering but controlled. The workers continued building around me, hammering boards into the frames of homes constructed on lies. They thought they had stolen my land. They thought they had won. But none of them, not Karen, not the HOA, not the arrogant workers, knew what kind of land they were standing on. They didn't know the valley's history. They didn't know why the soil here was unusually soft. They didn't know about the floodplain hidden in old maps they never bothered to check. And they definitely didn't know about the dam. I turned my truck toward the ridge, toward the overlook where I could see the reservoir glistening under the afternoon sun. The water was higher than I had seen in years, silent, powerful, waiting. A key hung from my rearview mirror, a single key, a key only I had. I gripped it between my fingers. If the HOA wanted a flood of consequences, they were standing in the perfect place to receive it. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that refused to loosen. I stood at the edge of my land again, watching the 35 stolen houses glisten under the rising sun like a row of polished lies. Workers were already out, hammering and drilling before the birds even finished waking up. Engines roared, sawdust drifted in the air. It was a symphony of theft disguised as progress. This time, I didn't storm toward the HOA trailer. I didn't yell. I didn't confront anyone. I simply watched. Because something had shifted inside me. I realized I didn't need to argue with Karen. I didn't need to stand in front of her office demanding answers from a woman who had no respect for law, logic, or other people's boundaries. I needed proof. Proof good enough to crush her in court. Proof clean enough to erase every house she had built on my land. So I began my investigation. I started with the original boundary markers, the ones my father had hammered into the soil 50 years ago. They were still there, rusted but solid, half buried beneath the dirt. The HOA had moved every single one. They didn't even bother hiding the old positions. I found the original stakes lying behind piles of lumber, tossed aside like trash, while new stakes had been hammered in miles inward, cutting deep into my property. I took photos of everything, photos from every angle, photos with timestamps, photos with GPS coordinates. Then I walked to the county office. The clerk, an older woman named Marcia, who had worked there longer than most of the town had been alive, frowned when I asked to see the official records. 35 homes? She repeated, adjusting her glasses. On your parcel? That doesn't make any sense. We never approved construction out there. My pulse quickened. They filed permits. She shook her head. Not with us. I pulled out the folder Karen gave me. The fake permits. Marcia didn't even need a second to confirm they were frauds. These stamps? She said softly. We stopped using this design 12 years ago. She tapped the signatures. This signature doesn't match any county official. She flipped to another page. And this date? The office was closed that day due to a storm. Every page held another lie. I left the office with copies of real county documents proving there were 0 legal filings for the HOA development. Not a single permit, no environmental study, no land transfer, nothing. It was one of the largest, sloppiest frauds the county had ever seen. Next, I visited the surveyor who had originally mapped my land years ago. He pulled out the old plat maps, flipping through them slowly. His eyebrows shot up when he saw the new stakes. They moved your entire western boundary, he said. By a mile. A mile? I repeated, stunned. Yes, he said firmly. They stole land. A lot of land. He printed the original maps and stamped them with his seal. Official, legal, undeniable. But the investigation didn't stop there. Word began to spread in the neighborhood. Whispered conversations turned into curious questions. A few residents approached me privately. They looked nervous, glancing around like they feared cameras or spies. One older man said quietly she threatened to fine me $500 if I questioned the expansion. Another neighbor whispered, "She told us you abandoned the land, said she bought it from the county. We didn't know." A young mother shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I had no idea our home was built on stolen land." I'm so sorry. The more people talked, the clearer it became. Karen had manipulated everyone, the workers, the buyers, the board members, even some county employees who trusted her word without checking. She operated like a dictator wrapped in pastel sweaters and HOA badges. She used fear to keep people silent. She used false authority to keep people obedient. And worst of all, she used lies to make millions selling homes on land that wasn't hers. I went door to door and met the families already moving into the houses. Some were excited, some proud, some uneasy. Most didn't know the HOA even lacked proper legal standing. They believed everything they were told, that the construction was approved, that the expansion was necessary. The land was properly acquired when I showed them the real maps, the real documents, the real ownership records. Their faces fell. A father of 3 rubbed his forehead. She said we'd have access to the private lake. "You mean my reservoir?" I asked. He blinked, stunned. "Reservoir?" She said it was part of the HOA perks. "She doesn't own it," I said quietly. "I do. And she never asked permission." He sank into a lawn chair, overwhelmed. We were misled. All of us. Each conversation built the same picture. Karen had built an entire empire of lies on other people's trust. I gathered witness statements. I photographed every boundary. I documented every complaint. I recorded every conversation. I gathered every scrap of evidence, organizing it with the precision of a man preparing for war. By the end of the week, I had a folder so thick it barely closed. But that wasn't the end. On the 8th day, I returned to the site with my camera, walking along the far edge of the property, where the houses were closest to the river. The soil was soft, dangerously soft. Water seeped up through the ground in patches, a warning sign any competent developer would have caught. But Karen wasn't competent. She wasn't careful. She wasn't legal. She was greedy, and her greed blinded her to something so obvious it almost made me laugh. These houses were built directly in the drainage pathway of the dam, one heavy flow, one controlled release, and the water would carve its way through this entire neighborhood like a blade through butter, not destroy lives, not hurt people, but erase the structures built illegally on my land. As I stood there looking at the foundation of House 12th sinking slightly on one corner, a cold realization swept through me. Karen thought she stole my land, but she didn't know the land. She didn't know the soil. She didn't know the river. She didn't. To know the dam, she didn't know me. She thought she had power, but nature and the truth had far more. I headed back to my truck, the folder of evidence on the passenger seat, the dam key hanging from the mirror. The HOA thought they were untouchable. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. After days of watching the HOA stomp across my land like they owned it, and after gathering more evidence than most detectives collect in an entire month, I realized something important. Yelling at Karen would never work. Reasoning with her would never work. Showing her documents, boundary lines, surveys, or laws would never work. Karen wasn't just arrogant. She was obsessed with winning, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. So I stopped confronting her. I stopped showing up at her trailer demanding honesty. I stopped trying to talk sense into a woman who belonged in a courtroom, not running a neighborhood. Instead, I became quiet, very quiet, and quiet people make arrogant people careless. From a distance, I watched them celebrate their progress. Every day the houses grew taller, brighter, more polished. Painters covered the siding in cheerful colors. Electricians wired the living rooms with ceiling lights. Landscapers planted small shrubs along the walkways. Even playground equipment arrived. Bright blue slides, small swings, and a climbing structure shaped like a castle. It was almost comical. They were building a kingdom on top of a ticking bomb, and they didn't even know it. Because while they hammered, drilled, and congratulated themselves, I stood on the ridge above everything, right beside the dam. The dam had always been a quiet giant, a structure older than most people in the neighborhood. Thick concrete walls held back a body of water that stretched far into the hills. Tall pine trees lined the edges, birds nested in the cracks. The gentle hum of pressure vibrated faintly through the air like a heartbeat. Most people forgot the dam existed. Karen didn't even know about it, but I knew every inch of it. The locks, the pressure valves, the flow controls, the emergency gateways. My father had taught me how to maintain it when I was barely a teenager. After he died, the county assigned the upkeep to me because I was the only one who understood the old system. Every time it rained, I checked it. Every time the seasons changed, I adjusted it. Every time it reached high levels, I made controlled releases. But now the reservoir sat full, very full, from weeks of rain, and below it sat 35 illegal homes. As I stood there looking over the valley, the wind blowing cold against my face, the truth settled in my chest. I didn't need to argue with Karen. I didn't need to fight her in person. I didn't need to confront anyone. I only needed to do what I had been trained to do: release the water, not all of it, not dangerously, not enough to cause harm to families or flood the streets. I wasn't a monster, unlike the woman who bulldozed my father's land and threatened me with security guards on property that wasn't hers. No, the release I had in mind was carefully controlled, safely monitored, and strategically planned. It would wash through the valley just enough to expose the foundation issues the HOA ignored, enough to make the houses unlivable, enough to expose every lie they had covered up with fresh paint and fake smiles. Nature would do the heavy lifting, gravity would do the rest, and when it was over, no one would be able to deny the truth. These houses never should have been built. The HOA kept bragging about their victory. They hosted meetings, invited families for early tours, hung banners that said, "Welcome to Willow Creek Expansion," and even recorded drone videos for the IR website. I watched one of those drones whiz past me on the ridge one afternoon. The operator stood far below, proudly capturing footage of the new neighborhood. He had no idea he was also filming me, standing at the dam's edge with my hands in my pockets and a quiet grin on my face. If he looked closely, he might have seen the glint of a key hanging from my thumb, my key to my dam, to my land, to their destruction. For a week straight, I checked water levels every morning. Each time the gauge ticked upward, the plan grew clearer. Storm clouds rolled across the valley. Small streams fed into the reservoir. The dam groaned quietly under the weight, like an ancient beast stirring from sleep. I kept my distance from the construction zone during that time. Let them think I gave up. Let them think I was defeated. Let Karen think she won. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, I saw her standing on the balcony of the first completed home. She held a glass of wine, laughing with a group of newly hired board members. She pointed at the houses, proud, triumphant, absolutely convinced she had outsmarted everyone, including me. I watched her from the ridge, the dam humming beside me. She had no clue how close she was to the edge of disaster. Days passed. Construction sped up. Families signed contracts. The HOA president held ribbon-cutting rehearsals. The community newsletter announced grand opening 2 weeks away. Perfect. By then, my evidence folder was thick. Every forgery documented, every boundary stake recorded, every witness statement printed, every map sealed and signed. I had enough proof to bury Karen legally. But first, I wanted her dreams to collapse the same way mine had, suddenly, completely, and with no warning. One calm afternoon, I returned to the dam. The air smelled of rain. The sky carried heavy clouds that whispered promises of storms. I walked to the old steel valve, rusty but strong, the padlock still firm around it. I held the key. For a long moment I stood still, breathing slowly, listening to the deep rumble of water pressing behind the concrete. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't rage. This was restoration. This was balance. Karen had stolen a valley. I was simply letting the valley take itself back. I slid the key into the lock. It clicked open. The metal creaked, heavy and ancient, as I turned the valve. A deep roar echoed through the chamber beneath the dam. Water surged forward, powerful, unstoppable, yet controlled by my hand. I didn't open it fully, just enough to fill the old riverbed, enough to saturate the soil under the houses, enough to show the truth beneath the pretty paint and cheap foundations. A slow, steady rush of water began to flow down the channel. By sunset, the first signs appeared. House 7th leaned slightly. House 12th steps cracked. House 3rd shifted on its foundation. Workers panicked. Buyers demanded answers. Karen blamed everyone but herself. I watched from the ridge as her empire began to crumble. Not with explosions, not with chaos, but with nature quietly revealing the truth. The HOA thought they stole my land. They had no idea the land could take itself back. The morning of the HOA's grand opening event arrived with a kind of forced cheerfulness that almost felt insulting. The sky was too blue, the sun too bright, and the banners too colorful for what was about to happen. Red, white, and gold streamers hung from fences that weren't supposed to exist. Balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze. A giant sign stood proudly near the entrance of the development. Welcome to Willow Creek Expansion, a new era of community living. Underneath those words, in smaller letters, it read, hosted by HOA President Karen Willis. I parked my truck on the ridge above the valley, the same ridge that overlooked the entire neighborhood. From there, the houses stretched out like a patchwork of stolen dreams. 35 homes, all built illegally, all built on my land, all standing confidently, unaware of the water quietly creeping beneath the soil, softening the earth inch by inch. Down below, music played from speakers the HOA rented for the celebration. Families gathered around tables, children chased each other between the houses. Realtors handed out brochures with glossy photos and promises of a safe, peaceful, modern community. Reporters held cameras ready for their interviews. Workers hurried around making final adjustments, painting rails, tightening screws, sweeping walkways. And in the middle of it all stood Karen. She wore a bright pink blazer today, paired with white heels and oversized sunglasses. She walked from group to group like a queen greeting her subjects, smiling, waving, shaking hands, laughing loudly at every joke she made. She pointed at the houses with pride, talking about vision, growth, and leadership. Not once did she look up the hill. Not once did she wonder where I was. Not once did she imagine the storm she was minutes away from facing. I leaned against my truck, watching her speech begin. Thank you all for coming, she announced, raising her arms like she was presenting a kingdom. This community expansion represents progress, opportunity, and a brighter future. These homes stand as proof of what strong leadership can accomplish. Strong leadership, leadership. Those two words felt like fire in my chest. As the crowd clapped, I turned away from the scene and walked toward the dam. The air changed immediately. Cooler, heavier, quieter. The massive concrete structure stretched before me like a sleeping giant. The deep rumble of water pressing against the wall vibrated under my boot. I approached the steel valve. The old padlock sat there untouched since the last time I checked it. The key hung around my neck. I took it in my hand, feeling its weight. Down in the valley, laughter echoed. Cameras clicked. Speeches continued. Celebration grew louder, and I smiled, not out of cruelty but out of justice. They built their kingdom on lies. Now the land would tell the truth. I slipped the key into the padlock. It clicked open with a sharp, satisfying snap. I tossed the lock aside and gripped the valve wheel with both hands. The wheel resisted at first, stiff, old, rusted, but slowly, inch by inch, it began to turn. The metal groaned. The pressure shifted. The ground beneath me vibrated as the ancient machinery woke from its long sleep. Then, a low, thunderous roar echoed from deep inside the dam. Water surged. First a trickle, then a stream, then a force so powerful it hummed like a living thing. The sound built into a rolling growl that spilled down the mountainside, rushing toward the valley in a widening river. I stepped back, watching the controlled flood begin its descent. Water poured through the old river channel, carving its way toward the foundations of every house the HOA built illegally. It didn't come in a giant wave. This wasn't a disaster. It was deliberate, measured, controlled, a correction. Down below, the reaction happened slowly at first. The child pointed, "Mommy, look, water." A couple standing near house #12 frowned. That's strange. Isn't this area supposed to be dry? Workers stopped mid-swing, staring at the water creeping toward their boots. Then the first foundation cracked. A deep, echoing pop rang out as the corner of a house sank just an inch, but it was enough to panic the workers. Is this a leak? Where is this water coming from? Back away, back away. Within minutes, the water reached the middle of the development, filling the gaps between houses, seeping into basements, turning the freshly landscaped yards into muddy pools. Karen's speech faltered. She stared at the spreading water, confusion twisting her face. At first, she tried to laugh it off. "Everyone, please remain calm. This is just runoff, a simple drainage issue." But then house #7 shifted visibly. A loud crack split the air. The balcony sagged to one side. Someone screamed. People ran backward as mud rippled beneath the structure. Then house #3 tilted. House #14 buckled. House #21 stairs collapsed entirely. The crowd erupted into chaos. Homebuyers ran. Realtors shouted. Cameramen filmed everything. Children cried. Construction workers screamed orders at each other. Water continued streaming down, steady, unstoppable, unbothered by panic. Karen finally broke. She spun around screaming, "Who did this? Who is responsible? Stop the water!" But no one listened. No one could. The dam controlled the flow, not her voice. She looked up toward the ridge, and that was the moment her world shattered, because she saw me, standing tall, silent, watching. Her face drained of color. She knew. She finally understood. The land she stole had always belonged to someone stronger than her lies. As foundations collapsed, as fences washed away, as fresh paint peeled under the pressure of moving water, Karen screamed my name. "You can't do this. You can't. I'll sue you. I'll—" Her voice was swallowed by another crack as house #5 tilted sideways. Neighbors scattered. Reporters recorded the entire scene. Workers abandoned their tools. And Karen, the woman who thought she controlled everything, stood ankle deep in mud, her perfect shoes sinking as her empire dissolved around her. Minutes later, the entire development looked like a battlefield of broken lumber, crooked walls, and shattered dreams. But no lives were lost. No one was hurt. Only the lies were destroyed. The water slowed, then stopped. I locked the dam again and placed the key back around my neck. Justice was not loud. Justice was not violent. Justice was simply the truth, revealed by nature itself. And this was only the beginning. Karen still had legal consequences waiting for her, and I was ready to deliver every one of them. When the water finally stopped flowing and the last ripples dissolved into the mud, a strange silence washed over the valley. Not peaceful silence. Not calming silence. A heavy, stunned, breathless silence, the kind that comes only after something enormous has happened. People stood frozen everywhere, still trying to process the sight of 35 brand new homes collapsing like dominoes across my land. Where moments earlier they stood tall and proud, they now leaned, cracked, tilted, or were half submerged in thick brown mud. It looked like the earth itself had swallowed the houses whole and spit out the mess as a warning. Karen was still screaming somewhere near the middle of the development, her heels sinking deeper into the wet ground as she tried to salvage her perfect image. Mud splashed across her pink blazer as she waved her arms at fleeing workers and panicked buyers. "Stop! Everyone stop!" she shrieked, slipping and nearly falling forward. "This isn't my fault. The landowner sabotaged us. He caused this disaster." Reporters were already filming her meltdown. Microphones caught every frantic word, every wild accusation, every desperate attempt to shift blame. Meanwhile, families and construction crews backed away from her like she was radioactive. No one wanted to be associated with the leader whose entire community empire was now sliding into mud. I walked down the ridge slowly, taking my time. Each step felt like the closing of a long, painful chapter. People stared at me as I approached, some angry, some confused, some relieved. But the truth hadn't reached them yet. The truth was still sitting inside my glove compartment in the thick folder containing every forged permit, every fake signature, every fake map, every lie Karen had told. Truth doesn't shout. Truth doesn't panic. Truth simply waits for the moment it is needed. By the time I reached the edge of the sinking foundation of house #17, 2 sheriff units arrived. Lights flashing, sirens off. Deputies stepped out, hands on their belts, looking around in disbelief at the destroyed development. One of them approached me first. "Sir, are you the property owner?" "Yes," I said. "I have documentation." "And are you the one who opened the dam?" "Yes," I answered simply. "A controlled release, completely legal, and completely necessary to expose criminal activity." He nodded once. "We need to see the documents." I handed him the folder. He flipped through it, page after page, boundary maps, survey records, photos of stolen stakes, fake permits, witness statements. His eyebrows rose higher with each passing sheet. "Good God," he whispered, "this is massive fraud." Another deputy joined us. "The county's been looking for someone forging signatures for months. This might be the entire source." Just then Karen stumbled toward us, covered in mud, up to her knees, mascara running down her face. "Arrest him!" she screamed, pointing at me with a shaking hand. "He's dangerous. He used the dam. He destroyed everything we built." The deputy held up the folder calmly. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe you committed felony fraud, property theft, falsifying permits, and endangering homebuyers." Karen froze. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. It was the first time I'd ever seen her speechless. The deputy continued, "Do you have permits for this development?" "Yes, of course I filed them. They're in my office." She pushed wet hair out of her face, frantic. They're real. We'll examine them," the deputy said. "But based on what we already see, they are likely forged." "No," she cried, backing away. "No, this is a misunderstanding. Those houses are my accomplishment, My project, my community. Her voice cracked. The deputy stepped forward. Ma'am, please stay where you are. Karen turned to run, but the mud was too thick. Her right heel sank so deep she toppled face first into the slush, screaming in frustration. Deputies rushed to her, pulling her up by her arms. No, she wailed as they clicked handcuffs around her wrists. You can't do this. This land is mine. It's HOA land. I'm the president. I make the rules. I decide what stands here. Ma'am, the deputy said firmly, you don't even own the soil beneath your feet. She screamed again as they dragged her toward the cruiser. You ruined everything. You ruined my legacy. But her legacy had always been built on lies, and lies never stand for long. Within days, investigators tore apart every record the HOA had ever filed. They found more forged documents, more false signatures, incorrect maps, fake environmental reports, financial fraud, misuse of funds, illegal sales. It was a mountain of corruption, all of it tied back to one person, Karen. Homebuyers demanded refunds and filed lawsuits. Contractors refused to work on anything associated with the HOA ever again. Families who had trusted Karen realized they had been manipulated and scammed. Meetings were held, hearings were scheduled, the state attorney investigated every detail. And through all of it, not a single person blamed me, because the truth was undeniable. Those houses were illegal, the land was stolen, and the water simply revealed the truth. A month later, I stood in court as the judge read out the verdict. Karen sat pale and trembling beside her attorney, her hands cuffed, her eyes empty. When the judge listed the charges, fraud, property theft, falsifying county documents, reckless endangerment, and more, she quietly began to cry. When he read the sentence, she sobbed. As she was led away, she turned to look at me with desperate, broken eyes. Please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think you'd fight back. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The land had spoken for me. After that, everything fell into place. My ownership was restored formally, publicly, and without dispute. The county apologized for letting Karen operate so freely. Neighbors thanked me for exposing her. The HOA board dissolved entirely. The broken houses were eventually cleared away, leaving the valley empty and peaceful again, exactly as it had been before the chaos. One evening I sat alone at the ridge, watching the sun set over my land. The reservoir shimmered calmly behind me, its water levels now safely controlled again. The air was quiet. The soil was damp but healing. Grass would grow back, life would return. I locked the dam valve with a new, stronger padlock and slipped the key into my pocket. Peace had returned, and this time no one would dare try to take it from me.